When you're smiling.
Hey, you. Bubbly sparkling water is crisp, refreshing, and perfect for any occasion. Kind of like my voice, but in a can. No calories, no sweeteners, all smiles. Bubbly. Crack a smile.
Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcasts, and you can catch us on YouTube at the Empire Media YouTube page. That's AMPIRE. Like, subscribe us on there, all that good stuff. As always, it's much appreciated. Today, I'm joined by longtime Washington, D.C. sports talk show host Kevin Sheehan, now with 980 The Fan in D.C. You can follow him on Twitter at Kevin Sheehan DC. We talk about the fan base, what's left, how passionate is it, and how can this team win people back? Could they start doing it this year? We discuss the playmakers. I saw a recent article that by a former general manager that considered this group average. Are they? Kevin has a strong take on that, and I tend to agree with him. I always love talking to Kevin. And oh, by the way, don't forget you can read my work on ESPN.com. Before I get started, one quick note on quarterback Ryan Fitzpatrick retiring. We never really got to see him do much, or for the media, even interact with him much at all. Pretty much in a short time here, every one-on-one request from us was rejected. I think we needed to get to know him a lot better. That's okay. But the point is, we didn't really get that full Fitzmagic experience. I do know teammates loved him. I know the coaches were excited about how he could help young players develop. While the focus on Taylor Heinicke was a lot with his arm, he was an inexperienced starting quarterback. It's not about age, it's about game experience. And there were numerous growing pains that led to questionable decisions. That's one thing I heard throughout the year, and that's natural. Those are growing pains, but it's what the coaches hope to avoid by having Fitzpatrick. I don't know how last year would have turned out. I'm guessing they win 1 to 2 more games with him on the field. But it's not as if he was ripping it up in camp as he was learning a new offense. In fact, I know that, he was clearly having some issues in the spring, and it caused some concern going to camp. Now, he did show some progress throughout camp, but it wasn't like he was just this dominant force. But again, learning, and still, it's worth wondering. Their plan was to start Fitzpatrick, win, they hoped, 9 to 10 games, and then make an aggressive move for a quarterback. Or if one did present itself, and if Fitzpatrick had played well, they would have just run it back and waited another year. So his injury led to Washington having Carson Wentz. I was looking forward to covering Fitzpatrick. It ended up to be a disappointment because he was hurt in the opening half of the first game. But he had a remarkable career. With that, let's get to my conversation with Kevin Sheehan. Is this skills group average?
This episode is brought to you by Cheetos Deja Tu Huella. Deja Tu Huella means leave your mark, and that's exactly what Latinos are doing all across the country. They're rewriting the rules and pushing the boundaries in their communities to leave their own unique mark. They use their gift, their superpoder, to make an impact, whether it's through art, music, fashion, food, or something else. And Cheetos will celebrate what they're doing by shining a light on their transformative power. The Deja Tu Huella program celebrates those leaving their mark in Latino communities. You can also celebrate by checking out the new podcast, Batman Unburied, on Spotify. Batman Unburied is presented by Cheetos Deja Tu Huella. Visit Batman Unburied on Spotify to learn more.
Well, Kevin, this will be weird for me interviewing you. But I always enjoy our conversation.
It's always my favorite, yeah.
Yeah, so I always enjoy it.
Good,
So
I'm glad I'm on the other side.
Yeah, there you go. So, but I did want to start with, because you and I have talked about this, about the passion for the fan base, for the Washington Commanders, et cetera. And I'm curious, Chap Peterson I don't know if he caused a bit of a stir late last week by saying he doesn't see the support there. He doesn't see that because that's one of the reasons why he was voting against, who would have voted against the stadium bill. So I'm curious from your perspective, lifelong guy here, former diehard Redskins fan, where do
Former.
you see things at with this franchise and then the support for it?
I think we just should deal with facts, because I think social media really kind of, speaks for a very small fraction of the fan base of, everything's okay. That group anyway, because it's not okay. They were dead last in attendance. They've been, heading in that direction for years. They're one of the worst local television markets for the NFL in the league. I think 7th worst last year in the NFL. And we know that, the people that do go to the game and the people that do watch the games aren't even that hardcore anymore. Sometimes they're just NFL fans or fantasy fans or guys that have bets on the game. Look, it's been in the process for years now. Snyder has chased away one of the most rabid fan bases in all of professional sports. It is, 20 or 30% of what it once was at its height. The question is, will it come back if things like winning happen or if he goes? I think the problem with that now, John, is that it feels very much with the new name and the new brand like an expansion team has landed in town, but without a new owner. And so I think even if this team were to take off and have some success, that it would be difficult to attract anywhere near what they used to have. They'd have to have a long run of 3, 4, 5 years of Super Bowl contending, Super Bowl winning success, in my opinion, to sort of capture the kind of numbers they used to get. I think that now is a pipe dream to get back to where they once were, especially if you think that it won't happen with this owner.
How much of that also kind of depends on, you have the Ravens up the street. When this team was winning before, that did not exist. Has that bitten in, you know what I mean? Saying like, so even if they got back to that point, would that have eroded that level of support because you have more of a choice if you're in Maryland?
I don't know that it's that much of a factor, John. We both know so many people that are done. And it has nothing to do with the Ravens. It has to do with their passion has just been sucked out of them by the losing, by the embarrassment, by the owner. And now really, by the new branding, by the new name. It doesn't feel like anything that they used to be attached to emotionally exists anymore. I don't think it has anything to do with Baltimore. I think certainly, that area of Howard County in Maryland, was always kind of a go either way, which team is winning, and the Ravens were and Washington wasn't. And they were, people that lived in that area were close to Baltimore anyway. And there's always been the fan that wasn't super hardcore to begin with, that may have jumped, on the Ravens. But I think people like me, or even younger or older who considered themselves diehard, didn't leave the team because there was a better option.
So if let's say, first of all, do you think this team is in position to start to try and win back some of those fans as far as where they might be headed? Do you like the direction of where this team is going?
Yeah, two separate questions. Will they win people back if they start to win? Again, I think that the name change may have been the final nail in the coffin for a significant percentage of people that were hardcore fans. But I don't know that they care about those people anymore. Maybe they shouldn't. They should be trying to target a new fan base. I think it's one of the reasons that potentially like a Prince William County is, in play, because there are younger people that may not, have the same kind of history, that may be looking, for a team to jump on. But winning has to happen. Any branding person will tell you that when you change a brand, you better have a really good product to offer those people that were with you, or even a new potential audience. So they've got to win. Will they? Never a sustained winner as long as Dan Snyder and Tanya Snyder are running the team. I don't believe that. I've got 22 years of evidence to support that. With a lot of great coaches that have come through here that could not make it happen, that left with losing records. And So as long as they own the team, I don't think that there will ever be a sustained winner, whether they're the Commanders or anything else. But could they be better this year? I think they will be better this year. They should be better on offense.
Right.
You know, they're upgraded at quarterback, even though I wasn't a huge fan of the Wentz trade. They've got a lot of weapons offensively. I mean, you know, if you add up every playmaker they have, they're right there in their division with Philadelphia in terms of the best supporting cast offensively for their quarterback. They don't have the best quarterback in the division, but they may have the best supporting cast on offense. And defensively, they can't be as bad as they were last year. They were horrible, and they faced a gauntlet of great quarterbacks last year. So there's a chance with, you know, at least on paper, you know, a schedule that's a little softer than it was last year for now anyway. There's a chance that they could be a better team than they were last year. I'd be surprised if they weren't a team that, you know, has a chance to win 8 games or more in 22.
Listen, I think 8 games, they've got to win. To me, in third year with Rivera, you've got to win 10. That to me would be like, if you want to set that bar, right? If you want to start to show people that you're making a move, I think going from 7 to 10 is not an unreasonable ask. Do you think?
No, I think that's almost like a separate topic. Like, this is a referendum year on Ron Rivera. It is. And they have created that referendum by building expectations that they're going to have a really good football team. You know, he's talked about the third year. He's talked about how important it is. It's time to take that next step. It's time to this is what he did in Carolina, third year, and it started a 5-year run of a lot of success, a lot of playoff games, a Super Bowl appearance. You know, we've heard some of the excuses as to why the defense wasn't great last year. It has to do with phase 2 of OTAs. Okay. But they've got some talent, and there's some belief in that building that certainly they can be a lot better than they were last year. You and I both know that they take a lot of stock in that 4-game winning streak without, you know, with major limitations from an injury standpoint, from a quarterback standpoint. I think Ron believes in Scott Turner a lot. And yeah, I think they've created kind of a bit of a referendum for the coach-centric, you know, leader, Rivera. They've got to get to the postseason this year. You know, whether that's 9 wins or 10 wins, anything less than that will be, well, what happened? I mean, context can play into it. They could lose, you know, all their quarterbacks like they have in recent years and have a bunch of injuries, and Philadelphia could turn out to be great and Dallas the same. But yeah, I think there's some, I don't know if there's Snyder pressure on Rivera, but he's, you know, created some there's some self-created pressure when, by the way, John, when last year ended, you and I both said there's not much expected from this team next year. They've kind of created the expectations, and they've kind of, with their actions, gone all in on 2022.
And Ron has been very clear, like you said, that, you know, third year is when you make your jump. And if you're building it right, I had Joe Banner on the podcast earlier this year and just talking about basically team building, right? And we looked at Jacksonville, what they've done in the first year of Peterson. He's like, he doesn't like that model because he said you get that instant jump, but then you're going to start to go down because you can't sustain based on what you're paying guys from the outside. Whereas this group has kind of gone the different way. So but the key is, if you're drafting and developing right, this is the year. And that's why I think it's a big year. But do you think that Ron has kind of talked himself into too much, or do you think it's a realistic jump to go from a 7 to a 10 win season?
I mean, it's the NFL, so it's totally realistic for almost anybody to go from 7 to 10 if everything breaks right.
It's also the NFC. Look at the NFC.
Yeah, I mean, and look at the NFC as well. Although, you know, Rodgers stayed in the conference and Brady came back, and but yeah, I mean, look, in the division, Philadelphia is a lot better than they were last year. You know, and their season comes down to whether or not they got it right at quarterback. Washington's better than they were at the end of last year, but their season comes down to whether or not they got a lot better at quarterback.
Right. A lot better, because they definitely got better, but a lot better is the key.
They got better.
Right.
Yeah, but to make the jump to 10 plus, you know, it's got to be much better, which, by the way, I think, you know, there's a chance it could be. But yeah, has he talked himself into it? Maybe, but I don't think it was necessary. I guess my point is, I didn't think it was necessary that he build expectations. It would have been better to kind of do what they've done here in the offseason and let the actions dictate the conversation rather than sort of inflating the conversation with their own words, because that now we know they feel like they're going to be a good team next year. Right. Whereas coming off 7-10 with a defense that was horrible, there were fewer expectations when the season ended, against the Giants in early January than there were the year before when they had gone toe-to-toe with Tampa in a playoff game. But now there are more expectations than there were a year ago. Now, maybe that would have been the case with the trade for Carson Wentz anyway. But, yeah, they talked themselves into certainly, self-imposed pressure on this third, all-important third year of his 5-year deal.
So I wanted to look at and you brought up the skill talent around Wentz and Mike Tannenbaum. This is one person's opinion, but there's a newsletter called The 33rd Team written by a lot of ex-GMs, coaches, front office people. Mike Tannenbaum used to be a GM, now works for ESPN, rated him by tiers, each group by tiers. So tier 1 is like the Bengals, the Raiders, the Dolphins. Tier 2, the Eagles are on tier 2. And then you get for Washington, Dallas, tier 3. Washington is tier 4. Giants are pulling up the rear in tier 7. Do you think so in other words, the tier 4 level, the description is teams that have an average group of playmakers need to add both talent and depth at their skill positions. Because I think they're going to be a little.
Is this all playmakers, John? Is this all playmakers?
Just playmakers. Too? Does not include quarterback. So like the Packers are also tier 4, but they also have a tier 1 quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. They listed Carson Wentz as a tier 6 guy, a guy you can win with, but needs a lot around him. So, but I'm curious, if, are we overstating where this group could be? Or do you think that other people might be undervaluing what this group could be?
Well, some of it has to do with whether or not Curtis Samuel comes back healthy and if Jahan Dotson was the right selection. Those are, going to be, for all intents and purposes, 2 newcomers to the offense next year, because Curtis Samuel didn't play.
Right.
I think they actually have some depth, certainly at wide receiver. They believe in De'Ami Brown. You know that.
Right. And De'Ami Brown wasn't even listed. De'Ami was not listed among the group, which is why, so sometimes you have to take it with a grain of salt, but it is it's an outside perspective. And so that's why I wanted to ask about it.
I mean, I did something a few weeks ago where I looked at their supporting cast, taking the quarterback out of the equation, and I thought it was right there with Philadelphia's in the NFC East, because Dallas has taken a step back, losing, Amari Cooper and Cedric Wilson. And Philadelphia took a big jump forward, obviously, with the trade for A.J. Brown. They're teaming Brown, Devontae Smith, Goddard, who's the best tight end in the division, really good running backs, and an excellent offensive line.
Right.
Washington's offensive line might be a bit of a question mark, but it may be their best coached unit on the team.
Definitely.
Their offensive line coaches, Matsko, is impressive. But I like Terry McLaurin's a top half of the league, maybe even a little bit better, number 1 receiver. Curtis Samuel's a dynamic weapon. I'm a big Dotson fan.
I like Dotson
debate whether or not he should have been taken at 16. I loved him a lot. You're a Big Ten guy.
Yeah,
I am
like
too.
Dotson.
We watched a lot of Jahan Dotson. I think Logan Thomas is actually really important, because I think there were signs last year without a quarterback and the year before that this guy could become truly a top, 5-ish kind of, pass catching tight end. Size, quarterback skills, all of that stuff. But we'll see what his injury produces. But I thought Gibson took a step forward last year. I know the PFF numbers say he missed a lot of yardage on zone runs. I personally thought he got better with his vision last year. And then you've got McKissick, who was, arguably their second best weapon on the team last year before he got hurt. So tier 4, I don't know. I mean, you mentioned a couple of the teams. look, Devontae Adams added to what, the Raiders had. Tyreek Hill added to what, Waddle and some of the guys the Dolphins had. The Eagles certainly have a lot of weapons offensively. There are teams that have more, but tier 3 indicates how many teams, or tier 4, how many teams are rated in front of them.
Right. There would be, let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 16 teams, 17 teams ahead of them. I'm not sure that I would agree with that.
I think they're better than that. I think their supporting cast, taking the quarterback out of the equation on offense, is probably better than that.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. I think so much of it depends on De'Ami Brown's development. And I personally look at De'Ami in this offense as a big play guy. He's not going to be a 50-catch guy. I don't think that's what you're going to get out of him. I think Dotson will be that guy. Right. I think he'll be a big help I really like Dotson. The more I think people see him, the more I think they're going to like him. And I think Samuel, we know what he can do when healthy. We saw it. Now, how they use him here, if they use him the same way, whatever. But even with this group coaching him in Carolina, he was productive their last year together. So, I do think that he's going to be a big help. And I'm not going to sleep on a Cam Sims for depth, and JD is a big help out of the backfield. I think the other factor is Brian Robinson as well. So I think there's a lot of depth there. But I'm with you. Like, I thought Gibson developed well at the end of the season with the vision. I felt like that Giants game, and I've talked a lot about this, I felt like that showed a lot of his patience and vision in that game. And I know the Giants had everybody had given up at that point. Sure. But it's still the traits that he showed to me were more important than the yards he gained necessarily. Like, he was running like they wanted him to run. Yeah.
I mean, look, if you're just looking for true guys that can make plays on an NFL field, Curtis Samuel's done it. Terry McLaurin's done it. J.D. McKissick's done it. And now you're going to add Dotson. If we even exclude De'Ami Brown and Gibson and Brian Robinson and Logan Thomas from the conversation, there's a lot to work with there. Is it elite? Is it Tyreek Hill? No. Is it Travis Kelce at tight end? No. But, is it Devontae? Do they have Devontae Adams, or, do they have Stephon Diggs on this team? They don't. But the adding all of those pieces together, I think they could be a difficult to cover team.
I think there's more depth across the board. So if you go into a 4-receiver set, for example, you can threaten with guys that you couldn't have done last year. Just lining up in a 4-receiver set doesn't threaten you, but lining up with 4 guys who can hurt you, it does threaten you. And so I think I think there's a little bit more ability to be versatile offensively because there's more depth of talent. Now, again, whether it's high end, but there's still quality depth across the board. And again, I do like Dotson, and the more I see him, the more I hear about him.
I like him a lot.
Yeah, the more I hear about him too from early reports. Again, early reports, it's early June, so take it for what it's worth. I remember a guy years ago under Norv Turner, Norman Miller, a running back who always looked good in the spring, and he never made the team. So you always have to keep that in mind. But Dotson is not Norman Miller. He's a first-round pick who has looked good early on in practice. Last thing,
John, I have to tell you, I don't even remember Norman Miller.
There, you shouldn't. I just always remember because he would be mentioned by the coaches in the spring, like, oh, Norman's looking really good. And then you get to the summer, it's like he's a forgotten guy. So that's why it's funny, even because when Anthony Armstrong came along, you see like, oh, he's tearing up in the spring, and you're kind of like, okay. But then he continued it in the summer. And that's when you're like, oh, okay. So you have to take things with a grain of salt because you've seen it before. But when a guy then takes it over to early parts of training camp, then it's like, now I think this guy's legit. Like they raved about Alfred Morris in the spring. And then you saw it in the summertime, some of the traits right away. So you figured this guy was going to be all right.
The most recent example of that was McLaurin, because behind the scenes, we were all hearing they love this guy. And remember when they drafted him, and you knew Terry McLaurin because you're an Ohio State guy, but they were like, this guy's going to be a phenomenal special teams player. Right. And there wasn't much discussion about him as a receiver. And then all of a sudden, You were hearing things, and then he really didn't play or show much in preseason. And then in the opener at Philadelphia with Case Keenum at quarterback, he blew up. And it was like, and Jay had this look like, yeah, we knew what we had in Terry.
Which they never did.
I also think about Jay with like running backs. Like, remember one off season he was raving about Mac Brown? Was it Mac Brown? It may have been Mac Brown or another running back.
It was Mac Brown.
And then you never saw him really.
Correct.
That
was always the James Thrash effect too. That was always the James Thrash effect. Like every year you hear from Gibbs.
Gibbs loved him.
We're going to get James the ball more, and every year at the end of the year, it's like,
loved him.
But they did. But they never got him the ball more.
No.
It was always the same.
Do you know that Cooley and Clinton have both told me on separate occasions that James Thrash was among the most respected teammates they ever played with?
Oh, I believe it.
And the most reliable of teammates that they ever played with.
I absolutely believe it, because there was nobody more consistent or more willing to do whatever he needed to do to win.
Right.
And so, and he did not complain. He just went out there and worked his butt off. But listen, I remember covering him his first camp and talking to him about his story after he starts to make some noise in his first camp and as a returner, and that, like, to me, that's always the fun part of this job, is seeing guys who come out of nowhere to do something, whether it's a James Thrash or an Armstrong or like Lorenzo Alexander. He did that. Like, if you remember, he had that game in the preseason where his helmet comes off, he still goes and makes a tackle, and it's like, oh my gosh, and next thing you know, they're making some noise. But those are the fun stories to cover. And so, with this group, I'll be curious to see if like a guy like Cole Turner makes some noise as the 5th round pick. But last thing then with the defense. How confident are you in what Chase Young and Sweat can do this year after what we saw, really in a year and a half with those two together now?
Well, I'm not super confident. I mean, I'm hopeful. Like, they're both extremely talented players. And I thought, I think in Chase Young's rookie of the year, I think, Montez Sweat was almost underrated. I mean, he had some big moments, the game at Pittsburgh on that Wednesday afternoon or Tuesday afternoon, whenever it was. And he just had some big moments, and he's extraordinarily talented and long and, a real havoc wreaker. Look, they need both of them to have, the kind of careers, starting with this season that people projected after seeing them early in their career. Not that Chase and Montez still aren't early in their careers, but they got to have big years. And, Chase Young's coming off an injury that I guess was more complicated than maybe we thought, based on the information from yesterday. So they've got to have big years. I'm not super confident. I'm confident in the talent, though. I mean, I was a big, Chase Young, let's lose to the Giants so we don't lose out on this generational defensive, talent guy when they had a chance to get the number 2 pick, which they got. And I was glad that they picked him. And I thought, he more than backed up everything that rookie year, even though they were playing against a lot of, backup quarterbacks and bad offensive teams. But, you can't spin it any other way other than last year was a major disappointment pre-injury. Like, they're, going back to the off season and then the actual production. So it does make you hesitate a little bit, especially with him coming off a major injury. But they've got the talent. And if they're going to be good defensively, then both of those players are going to have to be really good players.
And I think with Chase, the big key, and the one thing that I'm encouraged by, I guess I would say, or if you want the silver lining, the positive look, is that last year, part of the reason why he struggled is because he kind of changed up his approach as a pass rusher. And there were a lot of things going on. We saw that D-line was not working together at all. But I think also some of it was he decided to do something. He tried to be something he wasn't as a pass rusher. He needs to, when you watch his rushes at the end of his rookie year compared to last year in the first half, they're different. He was doing a lot more stutter stepping early on, through a lot of those games last year. And as soon as he'd stutter step, man, he was done. And you could see the difference. And so, like, to me, if he gets back to that, then I think he's got a chance to continue on that path he was initially on. But, you've got to get back to that. Then, okay, speaking, go ahead.
No, I agree with you. I think, the other part of it is there was clearly frustration with him among the defensive coaches, and not just him, but him in particular, in terms of, playing the scheme, adhering to their responsibilities, doing your job, being mature, being disciplined. And we heard that over and over again, and we know who they were talking about. And I've made the case before that, maybe Chase Young isn't a do your job kind of player. And if that's the truth, I mean, LT wasn't a do your job kind of player. Parcells and Belichick both have told the stories about how, on that particular play, he totally abdicated his responsibility based on the play call, but it worked out. He sacked Jaworski, created a fumble, and he scored a touchdown. Maybe Chase Young is one of those players you have to just turn loose on occasion and not worry about, gap scheme, sound, fundamental football. But that's for them to figure out.
Well, along those lines, I remember talking to Daryl Green one time. We're just talking casually at a high school football game of all places. But he's talking about that with Wilbur Marshall. He said with that group, like they knew Wilbur was going to freelance, but they knew it. So they knew how to play off of it. And so you could see, okay, if he's going in here, I'm going to cover out here. So they knew how to play off of him. But that was also a function of playing together and knowing the guys around you versus not having spent a lot of time with somebody and then not knowing what, I'm supposed to be doing this. And you have inexperienced linebackers or guys behind them. Like a guy like Landon Collins could play off somebody because he's smart. He's been experienced. But if you have Cole Holcomb and Jamin Davis who are trying to just figure it out, they're not going to be able to play off anybody. They're just trying to do their job. Like, wait a minute. So I wonder if that's part of it. Last thing then, Kevin, too, your confidence that Terry McLaurin will get a contract.
I am. I mean, I think it would be silly if they don't figure it out with him. And it's also true that a guy like Terry McLaurin is a third-round pick who hasn't made any real money yet, relative to an NFL, compensation. Does he really want to play a fourth year on, $2.6 million or whatever it is, as the third rounder, in his fourth year of his rookie deal, and risk, an injury that could keep him from that first big contract? I've heard people say, well, what if he doesn't want to sign here? And I guess what I'm getting at is a third rounder, if he ends up overperforming, which Terry McLaurin has done, takes a lot of risk on playing a fourth year on such little money comparatively to go for the big home run, which, by the way, would be a franchise tag more likely than not next year if he doesn't sign a long-term deal. Like, there's incentive for him to sign a long-term deal to get that generational money, which, let's call it 4 years, 96 million, 24 million a year or whatever it would be, with 50 or 60 of it guaranteed, whatever the deal would look like. Like Daron Payne's fifth-year option is well over $8 million. That's a big difference from being a first-round pick and a third-round pick. There's more incentive for the third-round pick to get the deal done if he's in position to do it before the final year of his deal with the team that drafted him. So I think it's going to happen. Do you?
Yes, I do. I still put it around an 8, my confidence level, believing that two-digit wiggle room, because you never know. But I do think it'll get done. And I think, like you said, the security for a guy who hasn't made the massive amount of money yet is a big deal. But also, I think this side recognizes they can't lose him. His value to them is pretty high. And I also think his value.
Question for you.
Go ahead.
My question for you, because this is usually the way we do this. I'm asking you questions. Although really, we don't really ask each other questions more often than not. But if the 2 out of 10 comes through and it doesn't get signed, what would be the cause of that? Terry didn't want to sign a deal, or the team just decided he wasn't worth what he was asking for?
I think it would be more of that. I think it would be that they disagreed on the comp player, whoever they comp him to, and that they would just disagree on the overall value with that. Like, does he see himself more as an AJ Brown, or does he see him, or do they see him as DJ Moore? Can you get somewhere in that middle? And if he doesn't want to be in that middle, if he just says, listen, I'm AJ Brown, and there you go, it's either 25 mil or nothing, I think that's where you would run into trouble. So
yeah, I think the team would be short-sighted, penny-wise, pound foolish, if they don't get a deal done with him because of a couple of $1 million a year. Because
I think
it's not just that he's a really good player; it's that we know what Ron's been trying to do. He's had his challenges in doing this with everything else that's going on in the organization, but he's been trying to change the culture. And Terry McLaurin is the kind of guy you change the culture.
He's a culture
with.
changer. Yep.
Yeah.
I think they know that. That's why I think it will get done. But I think if it doesn't get done, it'll be probably more so because of that. So we'll see. But they've got to get it done because you're going to need. There's been such a drumbeat of bad news or negative news for this team with the stadium stuff, with the get the hearings coming up later this month, et cetera, that they need a win for this franchise. And the win this summer would be Terry McLaurin. So, then we'll start to hear too, like they're going to retire this guy's jersey, this guy's jersey, this guy's jersey. I think there's going to be a lot of that stuff coming up this season. So yeah, just get ready. I think that'll happen.
Maybe they'll give people more than 48 hours notice.
I think we might see the next 5 years worth of jersey retirements pretty soon, just because they're going to say like, see, it's not about this. So there you go. So Kevin, thanks a lot for coming on, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, John. Thanks for having me as always.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to Kevin for joining me, and thank you as always for listening. I'll be back Monday with another episode. We'll talk to you next time.